Today's shiur is dedicated by our dear friend, Rabbi Brook, in loving memory of Dvorah Leah Yetel, Bas Rabbi Avraham, his daughter, in tribute to her yahrzeit on the 24th day of Tammuz. May she be a gutta better for her entire family and all of her loved ones and all the Jewish people, and continue to be a source of blessing and inspiration. Utehei nishmasa, her soul that was taken at a young age. Tehei nishmasa tzura b'tzver hachayim, until the great moment of Hey Kitzav V'rananu Sheikhna Yafar. Thank you very much, Rabbi Avraham. Should have only Psuris Tovus, Tamid Kol Hayamim, B'Tov HaNireh V'Niglan, a lot of nachas from the whole mishpacha with simcha, V'Tuv Levav. Amen. Today, we're going to begin learning a sicha by the Lubavitcher Rebbe that's titled Matos Maasei-Menachem Av. So shiur presented, a sicha presented by the Lubavitcher Rebbe on Shabbos Parshas Matos-Maasei Tovshin Mem Beis. That's summer 1982, during the Farbrengen of Shabbos Matos and Maasei, and a part of it also from Shabbos Emer Tovshin Lamed Zayin, Parshas Emer 1977, and it deals with an incredible theme that's connected to the 3 weeks, that's connected to the 9 days, that's connected specifically to the month Menachem Av, the month of Chodesh Av, which we're going to usher in this week, this coming Shabbos. It's also, of course, connected to the parshiyos of Matos and Maasei. I chose it not just because of the relevance to the time, but as you will see, that the Lubavitcher Rebbe here opens up vistas to incredibly powerful and revolutionary insights into how the Torah views the relationship of mind, body, soul, exile, redemption, our relationship with God, what God gives us, and what we kivayachal give back. It's very, very deep, extremely deep, and extremely powerful sicha of the Rebbe. And let's begin the journey. It's a long sicha, and it's, as I said, it's extremely apropos for this time of the year because that's what it deals with. But its messages are really universal and timeless. It's in Yiddish, the language in which he spoke and in which it was transcribed and edited by him, published in Likkutei Sichos, volume 23, Parshas Matos-Maasei. Be'ezer Hashem, I'll translate so everybody will be able to understand. If you didn't open up your source sheets, please do that now. If you're on the Zoom, there's a link. You can open it in chat, or you can go to theyeshiva.net. That's T-H-E, Yeshiva, Y-E-S-H-I-V-A, .net, and you'll see on top in the home page, it says Monday class, and you click on it, and on top of the video, it says view source sheets, or below the video, you see download. You could download the source sheets. If you're watching this at a later date, you could just go to recent classes, and this class will come up, Likkutei Sichos, Parshas Matos-Maasei, and you will find it. Begins the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Aleph. When the Parshas Matos-Maasei seine Mechuboros werden sie gelehnt b'Shabbos Mevorchim HaChodesh Menachem Av, other than ersten Shabbos von Chodesh Menachem Av. The rule of thumb in the Jewish calendar is that when the two parshas, the two portions of Matos Maasei, are linked together, we read them both, which is, by the way, in most years. There's only 2 unique situations in the calendar where we read Matos and Maasei separate, as he says in footnote 1. But most years, Matos Maasei are together. So they're always read either in the Shabbos that blesses Menachem Av, the Shabbos preceding the month, the Shabbos in which we bless the new month, or in the first Shabbos of the month of Menachem Av. For example, this year, Tavshin Pei Aleph 5781, Rosh Chodesh Av is on Shabbos. So the first day of Av is on Shabbos, and that's the day when we're going to read Matos Maasei in the first Shabbos of the month of Av. Al Pi Yadu, it's known, this is a famous axiom that's stated by the great Shalah, Rabbeinu Yeshaya Horowitz, the 16th century and 17th century great sage and rabbi of Frankfurt, Prague, and Jerusalem, Rabbeinu Yeshaya Horowitz, known as the Shalah because of his work Shnei Luchos HaBris. So he writes, as alle Parshas HaTorah haben a Sheiches zu dem Zman, in welchen sie werden gelehnt. All the portions of the Torah are connected to the times when we read them. So for example, it's not just, what the Shalah is saying is not just we read through the Torah throughout the year, we want to finish the Torah, so every Shabbos we do a parsha or 2. We begin Simchas Torah, Shabbos Bereshis, and then we conclude Simchas Torah. It happens to be that on Chanukah we'll read Parshas Miketz, right? And during the 3 weeks, or during Av, we'll read Parshas Matos-Maasei. But that's just, part of the cycle. It's coincidental. He says that's not the case. The portions of the Torah are always connected to the time of the year in which we read them. The week, the month, the festival, the holiday, the events of the time. Is move on as the Parshas Matos-Maasei haben a Sheiches nicht nur zum Klolos Azman sheben ha-Mitzarim, nor oiche beikar zu Chodesh Menachem Av. So from these words of the Shalah we can understand that the 2 portions, Matos and Maasei, are connected not just to the general unit of the 3 weeks, because they're read always during the 3 weeks. Matos Maasei is read during the Bein HaMitzarim. Bein HaMitzarim means between the straits, which represents the 21 days from the 17th of Tammuz to the 9th of Av. But it's also connected, and perhaps primarily connected, to the month of Menachem Av within the 3 weeks. Because Matos Maasei, when they're read together, is always read either in the first Shabbos of Av, or in the Shabbos that blesses the month of Av. And as he says in footnote 3, he quotes this Shalah, where the Shalah says about this, that the Parshas Matos Maasei Dvorim are always connected to the Bein HaMitzarim. And in footnote 4 he says that we have in this time of the year the Yeshna. Take a look at footnote 4 on the bottom of the page. The Yeshna, we have number 1, Klolos Hazman de Bein HaMitzarim. We have the unit of time called Bein HaMitzarim, we call it the 3 weeks. That's generally. Vihi, now this unit of time, number 2, Mischalakis Limei Tammuz Rimei Menachem Av, can be further subdivided into the days of Tammuz and the days of Av. The 3 weeks span from 17th of Tammuz all the way to the 9th of Av. So you have that subdivision, 2 months. Sheheim, a further division, 3. Mischalkim Li'imei Tchilas Av V'Shavua Shechal by Tisha B'Av. A further division is, in the days of Av itself, you have the days of the beginning of the month of Av, and you have Shavua Shechal by, which means the week in which Tisha B'Av falls out. Halachically, that has different categories. So within the month of Av itself, so we have different categories in halacha. We have the unit called the 3 weeks. That spans Shivasa B'Tammuz till Tisha B'Av. But then you have within that itself, you have the halachas that are related to the days of Tammuz. And then when the Chodesh Av begins, it's a new category. In Av itself, number 3, you have the beginning of Av, the first few days, and then you have the week in which Tisha B'Av falls out, which has a unique stringency. The week in which Tisha B'Av falls out. Shehu, and then he goes number 4, the last one, Mischalik, and this itself is divided, Avaloi Tamid, not always, depends on the year and depends on the calendar, Lemei HaShavua, to the days of the week, which means Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, then you have Erev Tisha B'Av, the day before Tisha B'Av, then you have Tisha B'Av itself, then you have Tisha B'Av Shenitche, Tisha B'Av that gets pushed off from Shabbos to Sunday, and then you have Motzei Tisha B'Av, the night and the day after Tisha B'Av, and Nafkem and Agam L'Poyel, and all of these units have consequences halachically. As explained in Shulchan Aruch, Erechayim, in these laws and in the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. So you have again the unit of the 3 weeks, which is divided number 2 in Tammuz and Av, which number 3 is divided the beginning of Av and the week in which Tisha B'Av falls out, which then further in that week itself, you'll have the days of the week in which Tisha B'Av falls out, and then you'll have the day before Tisha B'Av. You'll have Tisha B'Av, you'll have Tisha B'Av, if it's pushed off a day, it's pushed off because if it falls out on Shabbos, you don't fast, and you'll have Mitzvah Tisha B'Av. Now he says this already depends on the week. For example, this year Tisha B'Av is on a Sunday, so you don't have in the same week Erev Tisha B'Av and Tisha B'Av. It's a Tisha B'Av Nitcha. What's the Rebbe's point here with this? It's an interesting footnote. What's his point? His point is that when you say Matos Maasei is connected to the time, you could say it's connected to the general time, the Bein HaMetzarim. That's true, the 3 weeks. But within that unit of time, there's other subdivisions, further subdivisions. This was the precision in which the Rebbe would talk and communicate and write, that we're talking here about the connection not just with the general unit, but also to the specifics of the month of Menachem Av. This is his first introduction, that the Parshas Matos-Maasei are connected to the month of Av, Beis. The Minig Yisrael was Torah, he is to unroof in the Mchodesh, B'berchas HaChodesh, Menachem Av. The custom of the Jewish people. And when you say Minig, a Minig Yisrael, it's Torah. It has a definition of Torah. As he says in footnote 5, Yerushalmi, Psachim, Perek Dalet, Tosfos Menachos Daf Chaf, both state that a Minig that is entrenched by the Jewish people, an authentic Minig, is Torah, it's part of Torah. So the Minig by the Jewish people is that when we bless the new month, Shabbos Mevarchim, when we bless the new month, we call this month Menachem Av. Right? You remember on Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av. It has 2 words. Und das ist echt negei lahalacha. And it's not just a custom, it's an expression. It's relevant in law and halacha, practically. B'negeya, l'ksivas shem hachodesh and shtaris v'chuli. The way you write the name of the month when you write a legal document, and a legal document has to be legal and therefore every word is relevant. You're talking about a get, you're talking about another shtar that has legal authority, and the time, the month, the day is important. So he says the halacha is Eichvim and Schreibt Menachem Av, und Nachmer Afile mat geschrieben Menachem anstatt Av, is der get kosher. Weil Hadava Mofursim v'Yadua the Chodesh Av korele Chodesh Menachem. Und Nachmer yesh noyagim azid b'ksuvis und stadas schreibt man lechatchila Menachem b'makam Av. If somebody writes in a get or in another very important document the date Menachem Av, you don't say there's a problem here. It's called Av. No, it's completely fine. Furthermore, as the halachic authorities explain, even if you just write in the date Menachem, you don't write Av. You write, say, Yud Gimel Menachem. Yud Gimel Menachem. The get would still be valid. Why? There's no month. The answer is because it's known by everybody that the month of Av is called Menachem. So even if you just write Menachem, it's fine. As he brings in footnote from the Sefer, famous book Get Poshet in Even Ezer, the commentary Get Poshet, Pischei Tshuva, and the Aruch HaShulchan, Rabbi Michael Epstein, the Rav of Navardi, the Aruch HaShulchan, one of the great Litvish poskim of the previous generation. So he writes, he brings in footnote 6, that we don't have the minhag to write just Menachem. We don't write just Menachem, but he says, if somebody wrote Menachem Av, it's kosher, at least b'di'evet, because that's the nusach in all of the communities, the way they bless the month, and that's how people write it in the letters, etc. The point is, whether it's this minhag or that minhag, the name is Menachem Av, and therefore if somebody puts that in a get, even only the word Menachem, according to the poskim, it's kosher. Furthermore, as he brings from the get Pasha to number 7, Some people have a minhag that when it comes to a ksuva or other documents, they don't even write of. It's a minhag that they write only Menachem. What's his point? His point is that this name, Menachem Av, is a very Jewish name. That's the minhag of how to bless the new month. We don't just call it Av, we call it Menachem Av. And some people even call it only Menachem. And certainly if you write Menachem Av, it's a completely kosher get because that's how Jews call it. What do the words Menachem Av mean? He's now going to analyze, and that's going to be the focus of this sikha. One of the main focuses is, what does the word Menachem, we say it, Av means a father. What does Menachem mean? Menachem means he comforts, right? Menachem, from the word Nechama. On Tisha B'Av we have a special prayer, Nachem. We say Hamakim Yenachem. Nechama means comfort, solace. We offer condolences. It says, we offer our Nechama. So what does Menachem Av mean? Literal translation, it means he comforts the father. Menachem Av. Okay. Is this what it means? That we comfort the father, or that the father comforts us? It says, V'yesh loimer einem from the Pirushim B'zeh B'hektim. It's possible to explain one of the meanings of Menachem Av, but here we need an introduction. Does it really even make sense to analyze the name of a Jewish month? We have 12 names. We have Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul, Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevis, and of course Shvat, and Adar. Adar could sometimes be 1 and 2. But let's remember, Amru Razal, our sages tell us something fascinating. Shmois HaChadashim Olu B'Yodam Mibavo. The names of the months came up with the Jewish people when they ascended from Babylonia. If you read a Chumash or the Nevi'im, you don't see the names of months, right? You won't find anywhere in Chumash Moshe Rabbeinu telling the Jewish people, you left Mitzrayim in the month of Nisan, or you received the Torah in the month of Sivan. Doesn't exist. Why? So this is what the Gemara tells us. It's Yerushalmi Masechta Rosh Hashanah, Perek Aleph Halacha Beis, and Medrash Rabbah, as he says in footnote 8, and Tosfos brings it in Rosh Hashanah, that the names of the months that we are familiar with, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, this is not something that the Jewish people originally possessed. The month of Nisan is called in Chumash Chodesh HaRishon. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, Rosh Chodashim, Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chadshei Hashanah. It's called the first month. What we call Nisan didn't have the name Nisan, they called it the first month. When the Torah wants to speak about the day of Rosh Hashanah, or the day of Yom Kippur, what does it say? If you look in Parshas Emor, what does it say? It says, B'chodesh hashvi'i be'echad lachodesh. The 7th month, on the first day of the month. Or the 7th month, the 10th day of the month. It's all numbers. Months were defined by numbers. Just like the days of the week, yeah. In Hebrew, we don't have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. We have Yom Rishon b'Shabbos, Yom Sheni b'Shabbos, Yom Shlishi, like we say in the Shir Shel Yom, Yom Revi, the famous Ramban about it. The same is true with the names of the month. They didn't have names. Every month had a number, and when you said the number, you knew which month it was. So where did we get these names? And that's why you'll see in Chumash and in the early prophets you don't see the names. The answer is, this is something the Jews brought back from Babylonia. They went down to Babylonia, present-day Iraq, and Iran, in Galus, the first exile, when the first Commonwealth was destroyed, the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, the emperor of Babylonia, the king, the monarch of Babylonia, in the year 586 BCE, according to the secular calendar. In our calendar, the Churban Beis HaMikdash happens in the year 3338. 3,338. Gimel Allah from Shin Lamed Ches, which is Shilach. 3,338 since creation. That's when Nebuchadnezzar destroys the first Beis HaMikdash, and the Jewish people descend into a Babylonian exile that would last for at least 7 decades, and many would stay, but 42,000 would come back. So when the Jewish people come up from Babel, say the sages, they bring some gifts that they received while they were in exile. One of them is the names of the months. The names of the months comes from Babylonia. Now this is interesting. What does this mean? Shtete Mefarshim. So the commentators explain the Even Ezra, the Chiskuni in Parshas Boy, as he brings in footnote 10. As alle Shmois HaChadoshim seine Nitken l'Shoines b'Lashon Kodesh, l'Lashon Kazdim, Shemes Parsim. The commentators say that all the names of the months are not names of the holy language of Hebrew. Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, they're not Jewish names. They're Babylonian names or Persian names. They come from the Jewish people's time in Kazdim. Kazdim is Babylonia, which later was taken over a few decades later by the Persian Empire, which is called Farsi, and it's the area of Iraq and Iran. So he says, the Mefarshim say that all the names, they're not Hebrew names. They're not names of Lashon Kodesh. They're names that come from Babylonia, their language, and we took them, we borrowed them, and we brought them back to Eretz Yisrael, and we inserted them and made them part of Jewish life and Jewish culture. Fascinating. Says the Rebbe, but Al Pizah.
Yeah, it's very fascinating.
Interesting, yeah. And he says in footnote 10, you could research this, you have the Even Ezra and the Chiskuni and Parshas Boy, the Ramban, and Rav Kasher, he has a sefer called Torah Shlema. So in Parshas Boy, he has a long explanation on this. It's all in footnote 10, all the references. But Al Pizeh Verin Kamakushis.
These footnotes are written by the Rebbe?
Yeah. These footnotes were they may have not all been written, but many of them were written by the Rebbe, but they were all heavily edited by him. He would often add and take away, even if they were prepared by others. He edited them very heavily. He added a lot of things. He took out things. The Rebbe was very, very meticulous about footnotes. You'll see in all of the Sichos, sometimes the footnotes are much more than the text itself. You see in this page how many footnotes there are? And this is nach berachamim. Sometimes the footnotes could be, extremely elaborate. The Rebbe was a very, very big proponent of giving sources for everything, and many sources, and getting the sources right and knowing exactly what it says in the sources, and building on the sources. That's why everything has so many sources and everything is stated where it comes from, and even the language. For example, he says here, Shmois HaChadoshim alu biyadam mibavel. So in footnote 9 he says, but you should know that in Medrash the word biyadam is missing. In Yerushalmi it says the word biyadam. So even one word, how it's written in Gemara, how it's written in Medrash, he takes note of. Aber al pizah verin kamakushis. But this statement, even though Chazal say it, and the Mefarshim say that they obviously mean that they're not Jewish names, it raises questions. What are the questions? Men gewinnt kama v'kama drashir Razal auf Shemos HaChadoshim verbunden mit dem Teich von dem Wort wie es b'Lashon HaKodesh. Something very strange. Chazal take these names very seriously because they take the names of the months and they explain it, they expound on the names, explaining the meaning of these names the way they are in Hebrew. Right? An example he brings in footnote 14. The Medrash tells us in Psikta Zutra Saboy, why is it called Nisan? Why is Nisan called Nisan? So the answer is because Nisan is a Babylonian name. That's why it's called Nisan. Ask the Babylonians. Ask the Babylonians why they named it Nisan. So the Medrash says, no, you know why it's called Nisan? Shaboy Nasu Nisim li Yisrael. Nisan comes from the word Nes. Nes means a miracle. Like the Gemara says in Brachas, about if you see Nisan in a dream, right? Miracles happen. Nisan comes from the word Nes. Nes, miracles, wonders. It's the month in which miracles happened. Urei Medrash Shemes Kol HaChadoshim Sheva B'Torah Shlema. I'm reading from footnote 14. The Torah Shlema brings a Medrash explaining the names of all the months as though they were Hebrew words. Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul. And then translates the word, what the word means in Hebrew, what this word in Hebrew means, and explains that's why this month was named that way. But 1 second, I don't understand. You just said that it's named that way because it was just Babylonian names, and the Jews lived in Babylonia, so they picked up things from the culture. They picked up stuff from the Babylonian culture. You're going to start doing the same thing in English? Things we picked up in American, Jews are here in America for a long time. There's things from American culture that get inserted into the Jewish world. That's just the way it is. Not the names of the months. I mean, we have, we have April and May and June and July. They're not considered Jewish names. But let's say they would become Jewish names. Let's say we wouldn't have Nisan, Iyar. Say we have April, May, and June. And then you start telling me April with ganze drushes. It's a little strange. Ulahayim Rashi Tevis Dashem Elul. In the Mefarshim, there's a whole discussion about different acronyms of the name Elul, right? Ani Ledodi V'Doidi Li. It's a Babylonian name, for heaven's sake. Maybe we should take the name April or the name July. Juli, and stop making Rosh Hashanah on July, right? What's July? Yuli. Say Yuli is Yud, Vav, Lamed. We have this whole thing with Elul. Ani Ledodi V'Doidi Li. Ishlere Eyu Matanas Lavyonim, Aroin Luchos V'Shivrei Luchos, Ina Liyadoi V'Samti Lach, Ashira Lashem V'Yomru Le'Mor. Beautiful acronyms for Elul. The Bach and the Avud Raham and the Arizal and many commentators. It's a Babylonian name. Don't take it so seriously. And they do this with all the months, constantly. And he continues, Unit al derech with the Gemara sagt deshe derech sham. And it's not like the Gemara, there's a famous sugya on Shabbos Daf Ayin Zayin, where he uses common terminology, folk language, and shows the symbolic, the symbols, what it means. Like deshe is derech sham, a path there. It's clear in the Gemara that it's just homiletical. It's more charming and cute. In other words, explaining expressions and showing that they intimated ideas that they were used for. There was an expression, deshe, and he says deshe was used as a path, derech sham. Deshe is derech sham. The word deshe is a benit b'lashon HaKodesh. Nobody says that word deshe was a Hebrew word. And the Gemara is explaining the meaning of what the word means in Hebrew. No, it's just like it's called a remez. It's a homiletical intimation. I remember once was once a sikha, was Shabbos Vayechi Tov Shemam Zayin, Shabbos Vayechi 1987. So the Rebbe spoke. The Lubavitcher Rebbe quoted his father-in-law. His father-in-law said that in our times, the Jewish people have finished their avodah. The soldiers are ready, the uniforms are ready. What's left is medaf zuputzen the knep. We have to polish the buttons. Right? It's the makaba patish. It's the end of the end. The soldiers are ready. The soldiers were trained thousands of years. The uniforms are ready. But the last step is you got to polish the buttons. You got to polish the buttons. So he says that's what we have to do. We have to polish the buttons. So the Rebbe said that the buttons can have on them some, he said in English, some dust. Some dust. So you got to get rid of the dust. So when they prepared the Sikha, when they prepared that particular talk, so I was a little involved then. So even though it's usually not done, but since the Rebbe used an English word, so they put in that English word in Yiddish, Dalad Aleph Samach Tes, dust. There's a little dust. Even though you could have just written Shtoib in Yiddish, which is dust, but the Rebbe said dust, so they put in dust. So he writes a footnote, and he says, if we want to employ humor, al derech hatzachas, we want to employ some humor, dust is da sitra achara. Dust is da sitra achara. You have to get rid of the sitra achara. So we understand this concept that sometimes you'll take an English word or you'll take an Aramaic word, and you'll find it's not just humor in the sense that it's a joke. I don't mean humor as a joke. It's more humor in the sense that nobody's saying it's the literal interpretation. It's a remes. So that's what the Gemara in Shabbos, Ayin Zayin, and Ksuvos goes through different expressions that are not in Hebrew and just finds some intimation to a Hebrew meaning, and that's why people use it. Or at least it's connected to the way people use it. Mashenkin be'razal hanal. But in the Rabbi Seinu Zechen L'Rocha, in the Medrash that we quoted, is mashma, das ist als Teich von dem Wort. Over there, when you read through those Medrashim, it seems like that it's not just a far-fetched hint. Nisan, we know, doesn't mean miracles. Nisan is a Babylonian name, Babylonian title for the month Nisan, for the first month of the year. Once we have it, let me give you a little cute hint. Nisan means a Nes. When you read the Midrashim, it seems like they're saying, no, this is the reason it has the name. Nisan, Shabai Nasu, Nisan Yisrael. This is the taich, this is the meaning of the word, which is very strange. If it all comes from Babylonia, as the Mefarshim say, it's not Lashon Kodesh. If it's not Lashon Kodesh, it doesn't mean Nisan. It means something else, whatever it means in the Persian language or in the Babylonian language. You want to ask something? It's clear?
How do you say miracle in Hebrew?
It's a good question. In Hebrew, you say miracle nes. How you say a miracle in Persian, I don't know. Is there any Farsi hit? Maybe you'll tell us.
Nice.
You know Farsi?
Rabbi YY.
Yeah.
Also, very quickly, in footnote 16, is what's the Rashi Tavis based off of Shin, and he had it earlier as well in footnote 10. You seem to say Menachem Kasha or something. Is that Tosh? Some sefer.
Oh, footnote 16. B'Torah Shlema. There was Rev Menachem Mendel Kasher. Yeah. Shlema Kasher. You had a father and you had a son. They created the beautiful, beautiful set. It's a brilliant set called Torah Shlema. I have it. There's a Haggadah called Torah Shlema, yeah. What they did, what Rav Kasher did in the Torah Shlema was something amazing, is he compiles on every pasuk all the midrashim that are in that pasuk from everywhere, not just Gemara, but all the midrashim. And then he has footnotes where he explains them. And then in the back of the Svarim, he takes different complicated and interesting issues and he compiles everything there is about them. So there's a lot of very fascinating things in Torah Shlema that he goes through. This is one of them. One of his chapters, Parshas Boy, he deals with the names of the month at length. It's called, in Parshas Boy, Miluyim. It's like at the end of Boy, he has these epilogues that he adds. So he calls it Tesvav Shin, Torah Shlema. The Rebbe would quote him very, very often. Somebody wants to know why the Gemara discusses the idea of Desha, Derech Sham, and what's the point of it? The point of it is it's a story. It's a story that the Gemara brings in Shabbos. We once spoke about the story. That Reb Zera, one of the great Talmudic sages was Reb Zera, and he met Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda was standing at the entrance of his own father-in-law's house. And Reb Zera saw that Rabbi Yehuda is b'dicha daite. He's in a very, very good mood. He's in a cheerful mood. And Reb Zera realized that he can ask Rabbi Yehuda anything under the sun, and he would tell him the answer. So he asked him the famous question. Remember we once learned about it. Why do goats walk in front of the flock, and the ewes, the sheep, follow the goats? That's usually the system. So Yehuda told him, you remember, because in the creation of the world, first there was darkness, and then there was light. And goats are typically darker, so therefore they precede the ewes, which are typically white. Okay. This is Shabbos Daf Ayin Zayin Amid Beis. It's an interesting thing. Shabbos 77b. It's an interesting thing that when he sees his Rebbe Rabbi Yehuda in such a cheerful mood, this is what he decides to ask. obviously, no. Let's do the questions when I pause. It'll just be easier. Okay. And then he goes through a bunch of other questions. Very, very interesting questions. He wants to know why the grasshopper's antenna is soft. That's what he wants to know. Why does a chicken's lower eyelid cover the upper one? These are the types of, you could look it up in Shabbos. But then he says, why is a door called desha in Aramaic? That's the question. Why do we call a door desha? So Rabbi Yehuda answers, because dasha is derech sham, dalet shin. Derech sham. What does derech sham mean? It's the way through which you go in. That's the way. That's why a door is called a desha, because through the door you go into the house. That's the derech, you go into the house. Now, what does he mean here? He means that desha is a Hebrew word? No, in Aramaic they called a door dasha. So Rabbi Yehuda, in a cheerful way, says there's a hint. For us Jews, dasha is derech sham. He asks him also, why is a steer in Aramaic called darga? You know darga? By the way, darga became a very Jewish word. Madrega, darga. Right? Why is a steer called darga? So he says to him, darga is derech gag. It's the way to the roof. Derech gag, it's a way to the roof. Now that actually may be connected to Hebrew, because we have in Shir Hashirim, Yoinasi b'seiser hamadrega. Then he goes through another word. What's the other word? He goes through the word spices. Spices are called maskulisa. Maskulisa. So he says, because Monsey tichleda. When will this be finished? Because spices are used sparingly, so they last a long time. So maskulisa is Monsey tichleda. When is it going to finish? In other words, we always have it because the spices would not get spoiled and they would remain for a long time. People don't use spices so often and not a lot of it. You don't want to ruin the food. Then he says, why is Besa called Besa? Why is a house called Besa? So he says, Boy v'isiv. Besa, come and sit there. Come and I will sit in it. Okay, so bayis you have actually in Hebrew, right? Then he says, Biksa. What's Biksa? A small house is called a Biksa in Aramaic. Why? Because Be'aksa. Be'aksa means it's a narrow place. It's a place in which you feel stress because it's narrow, it's small. Be'aksa. What do all these things mean? And then he goes through a bunch of stuff. It's a whole long list. Many of the words, mamash, a very long list. He goes through probably another 10 names. You could read it on your own. Shabbos Ayin Zayin. What's the point in all of this? He's not saying that these are Hebrew words necessarily. Nobody's saying dasha is a Hebrew word. He's just finding a hint. Dasha is derech sham. But in these midrashim, it seems to be much more dramatic. It seems that they're actually explaining the meaning in Hebrew of these names. V'yesh loymar, he continues, v'yesh loymar v'lechayre b'pashtas ve'en makam l'kushya. One can answer, and it seems like this is actually a simple answer, and the questions are removed.
Okay.
And the answer is, the Pirush Maimer Azal, Olu b'yada mibavel is kipshute. Bered wegen dem Inyan von Shemes HaChadoshim v'suloi. Das heißt, als der Kesher von dem Wort mit dem Chodesh, es wird sein Shem is nes Chadish v'olam mibavel, aber nicht als der Wort is Miloshen Bavel. Perhaps when our sages said that the names of the month came up with the Jewish people from Babylonia, just translate the words. They're talking about the names of the months, not nothing else. In other words, that these names become the names of the months, that's what they took from Babylonia. The connection of the word with the month. The fact that the first month of our year we call Nisan, that came from Bavel. But perhaps the words themselves are not from the language of Bavel. And that's why they can explain all these words as though they were Hebrew words. What they learned from Bavel was the Shemus HaChadoshim. Not that the names themselves, the words themselves are from the Babylonian language. No, Shmois HaChadoshim Ola B'Yadam in Bavel. To associate these words and attribute them and connect them, align them, match them up with the first month, the second month, the third month, the fourth month. Tammuz should be called Tammuz, and Av should be called Av. The fifth month should be called Av, and the sixth month should be called Elul. That's what they got in Bavel. So the connection of the name of the title with the month, that it's called Shemus, it becomes its name, that came from Bavel. It's the Schadish Valam in Bavel. But the word itself has serious significance in Lashon Kodesh, which we know is considered a holy language, and every word is meticulous, and therefore they're explaining the meaning of that word. Nisan comes from the word Nes. And the same is true with the other months. And that's why Elul can have many acronyms in Hebrew. Ani l'doidi v'doidi li. What about ani l'doidi? It's not a Hebrew word. And no, it is. And therefore Elul could mean Ani l'doidi v'doidi li in Lashon Kodesh. This would explain it. And he brings in 17 that Rashi has an expression, v'koydem l'chein lo nizgalu. Before they came to Babylonia, these names were not revealed. It's an interesting expression. They weren't revealed. They weren't revealed. It means, in other words, it seems like that the names they had, it was just not connected to these months. This is one way of explaining it. Even if you're going to want to say that this is a far stretch, and at least some of the names are not Hebrew. You might, for example, say Tammuz, Elul, Kislev, Shvat. They're not Hebrew names. They're not Hebrew names. At least some of them you might insist that no, this is Babylonian language. He says perhaps, maybe. First the Rebbe suggests that no, the names are Hebrew names. The names of the months they got from Babylonia. In other words, to connect these names with Babylon, with these months, it came from Babylon. Now he's saying, even if you want to say that that's not the case, at least some of them are really from Babylonian language. Certainly there is an exception, and that's Av, because Av means a father, and that's a frequent name, of course, in the Tanakh in Hebrew. Av is father. So Av is obviously means a father. V'oid v'ikr. Furthermore, and this is the main thing, v'bada do seine Nemen was teure benutzt sich mit sei, ist verstandig, als haben den Pirush, wie sie werden genutzt und geteilt bloschen HaKodesh. Und befragt bin Janenu in dem Namen Menachem Av, als der Namen Av hat den Pirush von dem Wort Av bloschen HaKodesh. The fact is, any way you're going to spin this, that these became names that the Torah employs. The Torah employs these names. As he goes through in footnote 19, that already in Torah Shebeksav, in the later writings, you have the names of these months in Torah Shebeksav. And certainly in Torah Shebal Peh. You have, for example, the name of, you have in Mishnayos and Tainis and Targum Sheni and Targum Yonis and Ben Uziel. In other words, these became names that were fully embraced by Torah. So he says, if that's the case, we understand any way you want to spin it, that you can also translate the names as though they were Hebrew words. So when you come to the name of, Menachem Av, don't tell me Av doesn't mean a father. Av has some meaning. Go find out in Babylonia what it meant at the time. No. Certainly, even if you want, again, there's different ways of interpreting this. There's different ways of interpreting it, but whatever you want to say, it makes a lot of sense. It's appropriate to say that Av could be translated as a father. In other words, the way Av is in Lashon Kodesh. Even if you want to say that the word they actually got from there, not just the name. Because it becomes a Torah name. It was completely introduced into Torah. Just to say here two interesting footnotes. In 16, he quotes Rav Kasher, who says that that's not the case. The Jewish people, the Chazal tried to Judaize the names of the month. I'm learning Chav Gimel Matos Maasei. 16. B'Torah Shleimer Shem Kosav the Ishtadlu Chazal liyayid Hashemes HaChadoshim lidarshim ulachnis b'em toichen Yehudi. Our sages tried liyahid. You know what liyahid means? To Judaize. It's an interesting word, liyahid. They tried to make a Yehudi. to take the names of the month and make them Jewish, to put into them Jewish content. In other words, they knew that it wasn't Jewish. They knew that it was Babylonian. But they decided to manipulate it and make it Jewish. You adopt a child. They adopted these words. They made it part of the family. So they put in Jewish ideas into the name. Vitzar, which is, of course, in contradiction to what we're saying. Vitzar Chiyun Gadol. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says, it's hard to understand. Lama Nemar, Lama Neumar, Shenishtana, Mishar Midrashi Hashem is the Chachamene Zecharim Levrach. Why would we say here that all the other midrashim of names of our sages are different? And here, it's uniquely different, because in the other midrashim, they're actually explaining the meaning of the name. And here you're going to say they're not explaining the meaning of the name. They know it's not the meaning of the name. They're just trying to impose a Jewish theme into this name, even though it's not the meaning of the name. He says that would make these midrashim in a completely different genre, which is difficult to suggest. And see what he himself brings from Medrash Seichel Tov Yigash, where it's difficult to impose this. In footnote 18, so he's seems like he's arguing here with. Do you mind? I don't mind sitting with you. Footnote 18. Footnote 18, he says something else that's very interesting. Va'oid, gam lefi ha'mefarshim hanal, the loshen kazdim heim, yesh leimen al pi ma shekasav hashalah. Even according to the mefarshim who hold that all these names are really Babylonian names, they're not Jewish and they're not in Hebrew. We could still say something very special based on the Shalah. Shalah says as follows, listen to this. This is footnote 18. Kashetinu b'divrei razal shemafarshim teva v'oimnim shekenu loshen yevani olashenis achedim shel goyim al yala b'dayit chashatayra kas v'elu halashenis she'enam loshen kodesh elahachi pirusha kashabara hakadosh baruch hu elam lahayer ag loshen hakodesh ukashakalal hakadosh baruch hu halashenis b'der haflaga ba loshen hakodesh gam kim b'shar halashenis v'atevis hanal. V'atevis hanal him loshen kodesh v'nichelu b'loshen yevani oy b'kasvi oy b'afriki u'reidiv v'retere l'bara mechaba sefer minchas alazim adura beisim and zayin. Wow. Let's take the word toitafos. What does Rashi say? Anybody remembers? What's toitafos? You remember? Why is tefillin called toitafos? Anybody remembers? Nobody remembers why tefillin are called toitafos? Exactly. Tat and pas, yeah, in Africa and in Kasvi, tat and pas means two. So taitafos is 2 and 2. So I don't understand. So tefillin, the name for tefillin in Chumash is from Africano? It's from Africano? Nelson Mandela gave us that word? Taitafos?
I grew up in South Africa and I speak Afrikaans and I've never heard that word. So
you grew up there, you speak Afrikaans, you never heard taitafos, okay?
Nothing close.
Did you learn ancient Africana? From pre-biblical times. Okay. So the Shalah says something interesting. Whenever you find in Chazal, they take a word and they say this is a word in Greece, in ancient Greek. Or it's a word in Africano, or another language. Don't think that the Torah put in words that are not Lashon Kodesh. Why would the Torah not put it? It's a Torah in Lashon Kodesh. Why are you using Africano? Why are you using Greek? Greek words. The pshat is like this. When God created the world, there was only Lashon Kodesh. That was the language. Later, with the story of the Tower of Babel, we have the Der Haflaga. That's when the cultures got dispersed, nations got dispersed, and they developed different languages. And when different languages developed, they took words from Lashon Kodesh that became part of their languages. When Torah uses a word in ancient Greek or a word in ancient Africano, it's the word in Lashon Kodesh that got mixed into their language. Just like we have today in English or in Yiddish, words that are really Lashon Kodesh words. They got mixed into the English language. They got mixed into Latin. They got mixed into French. They got mixed into ancient Greek. So the Torah is just really reclaiming its own words. Its own words that got mixed into other languages because it all started with Lashon Kodesh. This is what the Shalah explains. And the Minchas Elazar, the Munkacher, who he references here, discusses this. So the Rebbe says it's possible, a whole new angle. Maybe these are Babylonian names, and they took from Babylonia, but they're still rooted ultimately in Lashon Kodesh, and that's why the Torah completely embraces them, makes them, so to speak, Jewish, and interprets them as Jewish words. And this would, of course, explain, as he says in 20, why Elul has all of these Hebrew acronyms, as though that's the meaning of Elul, when it's not. It's not even a Hebrew word. Other, they say, is Aleph Dar. Aleph Dar. Hashem lives. Other is the time where you have to find that God is living in everything. Aleph Other, Aleph Dar. What are you talking about? It's not Aleph Dar. It's not Echad Dar. But again, he's saying, once the Torah embraced it, you can give it an explanation for Hebrew, as a Hebrew word. Now, why is he giving this whole introduction? Why is he giving? It shows you, the Rebbe is building an idea. This sikh is going to be based on the meaning of Menachem Av. What does Menachem Av mean? But yet the whole premise would seem flawed if we didn't give this introduction. Because you're building a bridge from what? You have to have a foundation. If Menachem Av, if Av came from Babylonia, and Av doesn't mean a father, Av means something else. They just attached it with this name, with this month. So then this whole explanation would seem very strange. At best, it would just be a far-fetched, cute explanation. Just homiletic, not real, not authentic. He wants to show that it's not the case. That you're talking here about a name that is a Hebrew word, and therefore can have a Hebrew translation, and therefore we can explain it that way. Lefize kumtois, as Menachem Av hatem pirish as mis Menachem dem Av. So what does Menachem Av mean? We comfort the Father. Was benegeet zu Yidden meint es avinu shebashamayim Menachem dem Ebersten kavayach. When you're talking about the Jewish people, who is our Father? We have one Father, our Father in heaven, Hashem. So Menachem Av means he comforts the Father. Wenn me wollt gerufen im Chodesh Av Menachem, wollt es gemeint, dass der Av Avinu Shabashamayim is Menachem Eden. Aber wie bald, als der Name is Menachem Av, meint es, als der Av is der Misnachem. Al derech haloshen Menachem Tzion. Bebirches Nachem, was meint das Tzion is Misnachem, is der Eberst is Menachem Tzion. If we would have named this month of Menachem, not Menachem of Menachem, what would it mean? The Father comforts, of the Father, Menachem, he comforts. The Father comforts his children who are in mourning, who are grieving. The Father comforts them, of Menachem. As he brings in 22, the Maharil has an expression, Hilchos Tisha Yirachamenu ha'av. Let the Father have compassion on us. But we don't call it of Menachem. We call it Menachem Av. And we just explained that the names of the months are not just Persian and Babylonian, and we're just using them symbolically. They have real meaning in Hebrew. Either because the names come from the Jewish people. It's just the Babylonians taught them how to assign the names to certain months. And even if it's not true with all the names, it's certainly true with the name Av and Menachem, which are Hebrew words. And even without that, the Torah embraces these names, and therefore they become Torah-dic names. And therefore, you could translate them in Hebrew, even if you want to say that it all came from Babylonia. And regardless, you could say a third point is Shalah, that really, even if it came from Babylonia, originally it's Lashon Kodesh. But any way you want to spin this, the bottom line is you can explain the names. Of Menachem would mean the Father comforts us. Menachem Av means we comfort the Father. The Av, the father, is the one who receives the Nechama. Like we say in Nachem, there's a blessing on Tisha B'Av. In Shemini Esrei we say Nachem, right? So we say Menachem Tzion. What does Menachem Tzion mean? Who comforts whom? Not Tzion comforts us. Menachem Tzion. God comforts Tzion. Menachem goes on the one who comforts. Tzion, Zion, is the recipient of the Nechama. Tzion is Misnachemes. So Menachem Tzion means Tzion is comforted by Hashem. Baruch At Hashem Menachem Tzion Avoinu Yerushalayim. He is Menachem Tzion. So when you say Menachem Tzion, who receives the comfort? Tzion. Who gives the comfort? The Rebbeinu Shalom. When you say Menachem Av, who receives the comfort? The Father. Menachem Av, who comforts? Who comforts the Father? The Jewish people. Wow. This is pretty intense. So the main of the month is not the Father comforts the children. It's the children comfort the Father. What do you say about that? Behemshech l'maimer azal, as the Eibush tezakt, maloi la'av shehigle es banov, v'oilehem lebanim shegalam al shulchan avim is men im kevayachol menachem. Our sages tell us at the beginning of Maseches Brachas Daf Gimel that God cries and says, woe unto a father who has exiled his children, and woe unto children who have been exiled from the table of their father. So God speaks about his own pain, a father who lost his children, so we comfort him. So Menachem Av is the idea that we comfort the father. Menachem Av. Now this is very intense. What does this mean? First of all, what does it mean that we comfort God? Second of all, why does God need comfort? So he says because he lost his children. His children were exiled. Great, granted. How do we comfort him? And the big thing is, we don't even talk about him comforting us. We talk about us comforting him, not him comforting us. That's the big question. And that's going to be the paradigm, the foundation that this sikh is going to develop in the next shtickle. I'm going to wish you all a beautiful day. We're going to take a break here. God willing, we'll continue this Thursday morning, 7:30. You should all have a lot of hatzlacha, a meaningful day and an inspiring day. Tomorrow morning, Tuesday, 9:45, we have our weekly Parsha Shir. Everybody is invited on theyeshiva.net or here on Zoom. In the meantime, hatzlacha rabba to all of you. Yeah. Perhaps you could say Shvat is a Hebrew word. Perhaps, maybe, I don't know. You're saying it comes from the word Shvatim. It's possible. That's the discussion here. Is it a Hebrew word? Is it a Babylonian word? It's not clear. The Even Ezra, he brings the Even Ezra and the Chizkuni. They believe that all these names, take a look in footnote 10, all these names are basically Babylonian names or Persian names. It's a pleasure to have you, Reb Zalman. You have it in Arabic constantly. You see that they have a lot of words from Hebrew, right? That's what the Shalosh says. The Shalosh says that many cultures and many nations, they took Hebrew words, especially Arabic, because of the region.
Arabic is not Aramaic.
Right. Right.
Arabic maybe was a later language? Or?
I'm not familiar. I don't know when Arabic developed. I don't know.
Yeah.
We have to ask the linguists among us. Do we have any linguists here?
Because there's 70 that came
I'm not
after the Torah Floga,
Right.
and maybe Aramaic may be one of those. I'm not even sure. I don't know.
Doesn't change the fact that the word is already existed, like the Sharai is saying.
The Even Ezra writes, if you look in Parshas Boy, Perik Yud Beis, Pasuk Beis, on the Pasuk HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chadashim Rishnu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashana, the Ibn Ezra, and you're talking about this is the 11th and 12th century great Spanish sage and poet and philosopher and a great genius in science and astronomy and biblical commentator. He says that the way you find the Torah, the Tanakh, defining months, it's always by numbers, not by names. Not by names. Chodesh HaRishon, Chodesh HaSheni, Chodesh HaShlishi, Chodesh HaRevi. Yes, Moshe will tell you that the first month is Chodesh HaAviv. It's the time when the grain starts becoming ripe. That's a way to understand what the first month is, the month when we went out of Egypt. But then he says, the names Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, all these names, he says they're not Lashon Kodesh. They're Lashon Kazdim. They come from Babylonia. And he says that's why you will not find them in Chumash. That's why you will not find them in the beginning of Tanakh. Because they were not Jewish. They're not part of Jewish life. He says only later, when you get to the prophecies of Zechariah, Daniel, Ezra, Megillah Esther. Megillah, you have it. Right? You remember in the Megillah? It says that Haman threw a lot, right? And the lot fell out on which month? Chodesh Adar. In Megillah Esther, you have the month Adar. You have the month Sivan. You have the month Nisan. Why? So the Ibn Ezra says, because they developed in exile. When did the Megillah happen? When was Megillah Esther written? After the Jews went into exile. And they were under Babylonian rule and under Persian rule. And in the days of Achashverosh, the story of Purim happened. So that's why in Megillah Esther, you'll find these names. So this is the view of the Ibn Ezra. This is the view of the Chizkuni, who was one of the Rishonim. He says in the Sikha, this is what it seems like to be the view of the Ramban. This is what Rav Kasher explains at length in Torah Shleima. Right? The question is, what about the name of? The name of, as he says in footnote 11, what about of? Of is a Jewish name. So he says it could be that Ibn Ezra means most of the names come from Babylonia, not all of them. Of is a Jewish name. Or maybe even Of is a Babylonian name. That's what he says in footnote 11. It's possible that they believed that Of was a Babylonian or Persian name because of, and they named this month August Of because of certain things that happened at that month or whatever that time of the calendar is connected with, and it's somehow intimated in the name Of in the Persian or Babylonian meaning, not Hebrew. So that would be really fascinating, that even Of doesn't mean father. Of means something else. That's one way of looking at it, and therefore there's no reason to explain any symbolisms in the names of our months. But then the Rebbe says, you see that the Chazal did explain symbolisms, so that's why he suggests a few different options. Number one, that the names, the titles themselves are Hebrew ones. It's just their associations with the months come from Babylonia. Number two, even if that's not the case with many of them, but that's the case with Of, that it's a Hebrew name, it's just association with this month comes from Babylonia. Yeah. Number three, you could say that regardless of all of this, the fact that the Torah re-embraces these names, it becomes part of Torah language, it becomes part of Torah vernacular, and therefore you can explain it in Hebrew, even if it originated in Babylonia. It was, so to speak, adopted, so to speak. And then he adds that other point from the Shalah that perhaps, even if you say they were completely Babylonian, it's possible that they were originally Lashon Kodesh, and then they fell into Babylonia, and the Jews just reclaimed them as their own, and therefore you could certainly explain them as Hebrew words, and that's why he goes on to explain the meaning of Menachem Av.